All right, it looks like we have a nice crowd of people here this morning. And on behalf of the Jasper Chamber, I'd like to welcome you to our legislative, Meet the Legislators. We've called this before a legislative breakfast, and as you can tell, there's very little breakfast that's involved in this event. So we'll start calling this the Meet the Legislators. And I do appreciate everyone being here. I know that there may be some topics that you're interested in, things that are concerning to you or that you're passionate about. And so after we have our legislators talk about things going on at the state legislature, in the state legislature this year, we will open it up to questions and answers from the audience. We would appreciate, though, if you would limit your question to a minute or less in what you have to say. And it would also be good if you would talk about things that are currently going on in the state legislature. You know, sometimes people have things that they're passionate about, but things that they're not addressing at the state legislature. So we would appreciate if you would keep it to things that they are currently involved in. And now I would like to turn this over to Christian Bloom. He is the Dean at VUJC, and he would like to say a few words.
Good morning. Thank you, Nancy. Thank all of you for being here today, and I'd like to add my thank you to the elected officials for participating in today's event. Welcome to the Center for Technology, Innovation, and Manufacturing. As most of you are probably aware of the VUJ story, in 1958, a group of concerted local citizens formed the Committee on Higher Education and Related Events, recognizing the need for those services in the county and the region. And 12 years later, they engaged Vincennes University in 1970 to bring an operation here to Jasper and start offering classes in a variety of buildings downtown, and then later opened in 1974 here on our current campus. So thank you for your activism. VUJ is a great example of what happens when citizens get involved and advocate for the needs of their communities. We wouldn't be here at VUJ if it weren't for citizens like you. So thank you for being here today, and I hope you enjoyed the event.
I did also want to mention there are restrooms down the hallway if you need to use those. And our local TV station is going to be 18 WJTS will be airing this on Tuesday, the 30th at 1:30 Eastern Time, and then again on Thursday, February the 1st at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So you'll be able to watch this again if you're so inclined to do so. And now I would like to, just a moment, you can come down and have a seat, please. I would like to introduce our state legislators that we're so proud to have here this morning. We have Steve Bartels, Shane Lindauer, Erin Houchin, and Mark Messmer. So let's thank them for taking their time to be here this morning.
Hello? There we go. I'm fine with that. As a new guy, I'd let somebody with seniority go. Well, I want to thank Vincennes University. As you may not know, that I did attend Vincennes University to receive my pilot's license. And then I want to thank the Chamber also for having here. So being a new guy, what a wow experience. Nothing is more humbling than walking out of our apartment on Market Street, turning the corner, looking at the Capitol building and say, wow, I work here. And I represent the people of my district. It's very humbling. From my standpoint, most of you kind of seen literature on me. I'm pro local units of government. Very supportive of veterans, being a veteran myself and having a father killed in Vietnam and my son now in the military. Law enforcement, I have a law enforcement background, so you'll see a lot of legislation that I'll be involved in from a law enforcement standpoint, and we've just passed a few things that are very pro law enforcement. I have several businesses operating in the district, and so I'm very supportive of local economic development from a small business standpoint, and also have been involved in local economic development. Ed and I have served together on some things as I've kind of served my county in that capacity for free. So from that's kind of me in a nutshell, and we'll turn it to the other new guy.
Yeah, so my name's Shane Lindauer. I represent District 63, which is part of Du Bois, Davies, Pike, and Martin counties. Steve and I are roommates, so we get a bounce a lot of ideas. I'm not sure it's a good idea to put the two new guys together in an apartment, but in any case, that's what it is. So I echo some of his sentiments. It's very humbling to turn the corner and see the state capitol and recognize that we represent District 63, and it's an honor. It's humbling. People ask me all the time what I've how's it going? And it's been exciting. It's been fun. It's been humbling. It's been nerve-wracking, and it's been overwhelming. So it's been a little bit of everything. But the bottom line is it's been a great experience. Again, humbled and honored to have had the experience, and just look forward to continuing to represent the district and in going forward. So as far as again my perspective, again similar to Steve, I've got a local government. I was on county council here in Du Bois County from 2010 to 2014. One of my little tagline, if you will, is local government begins at home. Good local government begins at home. But I mean that quite literally at home, in the home. I feel that as a people, as a governing, people who are governed in the type of system that we're set up with in our nation, the best form of government comes from self-government out of the home. And so I believe that's where it should start, and then on up the chain to the local units, whether it be the city or the county, whenever possible, than the state and federal. Obviously, there's a balance there. I've talked about that many times when I've had the opportunity, and we've run into that a couple times already this legislative session, where there's got to be a balance between, what do you do at the state, what do you do at the local level, and those are tough decisions that I've found already thus far to make. When you push that button that is going to impact a local government, it's difficult to make at times. So those are things, again, I'll continue to learn, continue to encourage feedback from anyone, and not just District 63, obviously, but in particular District 63. I'm always willing to hear feedback, hear ideas. We may not always agree, but I promise that I will give you a hearing and listen to you, even if we don't agree. So with that, as far as legislation, this session thus far, I only authored myself one bill. It was a veterans issue because it had a large fiscal impact on the state economy. It didn't get heard. Those I found out quickly that bills that impact the state economy are not typically heard in non-budget years. So it really didn't go anywhere, unfortunately. So the veterans bill didn't move. I have had opportunity subsequently, though, to co-author a few bills. The one I'm most excited about was it's actually House Bill 1341, authored primarily by Ed Soliday, Representative Ed Soliday, and he has done a great deal of research and taken upon himself got to get a lot of information on autonomous vehicles. So that's something that maybe we feel like is a long way off, possibly, but is maybe not as far off as we think it is. So I'm on the Roads and Transportation Committee with Representative Soliday and Representative Sullivan, Holly Sullivan out of the Evansville area, and they've done a great deal of work, and so I've been able to kind of ride their coattails, so to speak, and get up to speed on some of this stuff. But basically that bill just implements certain safety guidelines, safety requirements before someone can just put an autonomous vehicle on the road. So there's a lot that goes into that. Obviously, I'd be happy to talk to you all more about it. When the time comes, if y'all have questions later or whatever. So, but anyway, that's I think the most exciting thing that for me that I've been a part of as far as a bill that's moving currently. So, with that, I'll turn it over.
There. Good morning. Thank you all for coming out. I have to give a shout out to my daughter who just got a gold medal in her solo and ensemble concert this morning. So she is having a much better time with her grandmother on an excursion, so I just wanted to say, sometimes in all of our jobs we have to miss things. I drive back and forth from the State House. Last session I was home every night, and I don't miss too many things, but I just, I'm happy to be here with you all this morning. It's important for elected officials to make themselves available and to answer questions and give you updates on some of the things that we're working on. So I'm happy to be here with you this morning, but did want to give a shout out to my 6th grader, so thank you. I'm Senator Erin Houchin. I first got elected in 2014. I served Washington, Orange, Harrison, Crawford, Perry, and then the eastern half of Du Bois County. It's been a pleasure and an honor to serve. I'd like to talk about some of the legislation that I am working on. On my handout that is around, I do have a list of the things that I have filed. Of course, there are many, many more bills. I don't know what number we're on in terms of filing, 500 or something in the Senate. So at any rate, I do want to talk about some of the things that I've been working on. My approach as a legislator really has been to hear from constituents, and if I am made aware of any gaps, then I try to file legislation that fills those gaps. And so if you look at some of the things that I'm working on, those are intended to fill gaps in our system that I think we could do better, where I think we could do better. One of those issues is with our opiate crisis. Indiana is the 11th highest prescribing state in the nation for opiates. We know that opiate addiction often likely leads to heroin addiction, and we know the scourge of heroin and that crisis in our state. I started this effort on this initiative in 2016. I became aware of locally the number of prescriptions that were written for opiates in my home community. That was brought to my attention, and the number of pills that are inundating our state. It prompted me to do some further research on how many prescriptions were being written statewide, how many doses were available statewide of these very addictive opiates. I realized at that time that our INSPECT program, which is our prescription drug monitoring program, the INSPECT program is used by physicians and pharmacies to track controlled substances. And that program a year ago, in 2016, in the fall of 2016, only 14% of physicians who were eligible to write prescriptions for opiates were even registered with the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program, INSPECT. So the state of Indiana has made considerable investments in this program, and it wasn't being used. And so at that time, I filed legislation which would have required physicians to register with the INSPECT program if they want to write prescriptions for controlled substances, and to search that record prior to writing a prescription for an opiate. And that bill received considerable opposition from the medical community, who thought that that was a very onerous requirement, that the searches took 2 to 5 minutes, and that was affecting patient care. What we do in these processes as we file legislation and try to work them through, we do talk with the various stakeholders, hospitals, physicians, consumers, constituents. We talk with all of these groups trying to come up with a workable solution, and we listen to all sides, and we try to come up with what is a reasonable way forward. Ultimately, that piece of legislation ended up in a study committee. I also included, which Mark knows a study committee is like the funeral dirge for bills. However, the Legislative Council did study the issue. Part of my legislation asked for the state government to access federal dollars that are available, which would integrate the INSPECT data into electronic health records. So rather than a separate search, the integration would put that information right into electronic health records at the click of a button. So those 2 to 5 minute searches become 2-second searches. Again, that bill became a study committee. I was happy that sometimes it becomes a study committee and they don't actually ever study it. But they did study this issue last interim, and I was happy to receive a call from Governor Holcomb late last year announcing that he would be funding integration of the Inspect report into electronic health records. And I knew I was going to file this bill again, and was preparing to do that when I got a call from Governor Holcomb, who said, we'd like to include your bill on our legislative agenda this session. And that makes it much more likely that it's not just me, little old me, trying to put forth an issue, but I have a lot of other people helping, and Mark's been supportive of it, and in fact, it passed the Senate 47-1 this week. So it is moving over to the House, and I do believe that we will make some progress on this bill. So boys, I hope that you'll consider that favorably when it comes across your desk. But I'm proud of the work that I've been trying to do on that. It's really intended to eliminate doctor hopping and overprescribing of opiates. So you can imagine a situation where someone who there are circumstances where patients might be trying to get their hands on as many opiates as possible, whether for themselves or to traffic them in our communities. And if a physician is not searching where else that patient's prescriptions are coming from, they could get their hands on a number of prescriptions, and they are getting their hands on a number of prescriptions. So by requiring the searches, a physician will know if they have just gotten a similar prescription from another physician, or they will know if they're trying to access benzodiazepines, which benzodiazepines in conjunction with opiates, that is a cocktail for overdosing, and we know we have a terrible problem with overdosing on opiates in our state as well. So I'm proud of the work that we've done on that bill with this growing crisis. My effort, and yes, we need access to treatment, but until we stop the overprescribing, until we stop this problem at the source, at the prescription level, with people getting their hands on many, many opiates, we're not going to stop the creation of addicts in the first place. We're not going to stop the flow of this addiction problem, and we won't be able to get a handle on it. So my effort has been, where's the gap? Well, I think there's a huge gap here, and I'm going to see what I can do to close that gap, and that's what I've been trying to work on with the opiate problem. The next bill is the issue of dyslexia. If you are following me on Facebook, you'll know that bill is important to our family. It is based on hundreds of conversations I've had from parents throughout the state of Indiana who've had an experience on the issue of dyslexia, including 8th District Congressman Larry Houchin, and our own family. Our son has dyslexia. He's 8 years old, and he is a very bright, creative, intelligent young man who has a really hard time with phonics and reading and spelling and writing. And we went to the school corporation with concerns in kindergarten and first grade, and we're told, and my story is a story repeated across the state of Indiana. He's fine, he's a boy, he'll catch up. And in second grade, his teacher, thank the Lord, said she had some concerns. And we had shared these and felt these, and it was a difficult day to have that conversation with his teacher. But she said he's really behind in phonics, and recognizing he couldn't, when he got to having to decode a word that is a nonsense word, and this is a key for kids with dyslexia. We can look at a nonsense word and take those phonetic sounds and decode that and be able to read it. Kids with dyslexia look at a nonsense word and they are incapable of decoding it because they have a very difficult time matching the phonetic sounds with the letters. And the way I describe it for people that don't have experience with this issue of dyslexia is that it would be like if you were transported into a classroom that it was taught in a foreign language. and you could understand what people were saying, but when it came to reading and writing, it was like it was written in Spanish and you didn't know how to speak it, or Russian and you didn't know how to speak it. And they really cannot learn reading and writing and letter sounds without being explicitly taught, much like you would teach a person who had no knowledge of a foreign language, the alphabet, the sounds that go with that, and how to read those words. And so we're putting kids with dyslexia in classrooms and expecting them to catch up. And my son, the school evaluated him and said he had an auditory processing disorder. We went back to the school and said, okay, how do we get a further evaluation? There's one person that does that. She's in Carmel, Indiana. And you can pay for that, or the school does offer to help with those costs. We ended up taking him to the evaluation, and guess what? He did not have an auditory processing disorder. So at that point, we were stuck with an evaluation that said he had an auditory processing disorder and a confirmation that he did not. If we had stopped there, he'd be on an individual education plan for an auditory processing disorder that he did not have. Now, the good news is he was evaluated by a physician at Riley and diagnosed with dyslexia. And the great news is we know what works for kids with dyslexia. It's been researched. We know the methodologies that work for those kids. Research has shown that up to 20% of the population is affected at some level with dyslexia. And so the fact that we're not recognizing it, there's non-existent screening tools, and schools don't even have the understanding in large measure of what dyslexia is and how it impacts kids in the classroom. And in fact, teachers that have been trained in the methodologies for dyslexia now not only use them for their kids with dyslexia, but they use them for their entire class. And so my bill is a simple screening tool for kindergarten, first, and second graders, because we know early intervention is key, and we know we can identify dyslexia in those grade levels and even as early as preschool. So it will have a screening measure that just determines if kids are at risk or not at risk for dyslexia. It measures things like phonics, that those nonsense word decoding, and once a child is identified as at risk, then they can be further evaluated, and it allows them to be on an individual education plan specific to dyslexia so they can get those proper interventions that they need to be successful. And I'm happy to report that my son is doing great now that he's on the right interventions, and I wish I had it with me, but a parent gave me 2 samples of her child before intervention with the proper methodologies and after intervention, and she went from missing everything to getting A+. I mean, that's the difference we can make for kids if we get it right. So that's very important to me, and since I have started on this effort, I've heard from hundreds of parents whose story is my story, and the post on Facebook has been shared 190 times. It's the most shared Facebook post I've ever had, over almost 300 comments. And so it is an issue that many people in Indiana care about, because chances are, if you don't have a family member with dyslexia, you know somebody that does. So that one is going to be up for a vote in the Senate, on the Senate floor next week. It did pass out of the Education Committee 10-0. A few other issues I'll touch on briefly. The broadband initiative, since I got to the General Assembly, I've been working on trying to get broadband access for our district. Indiana is mostly served by broadband access, and however, there is a section of the state that does not have much access at all. Does anyone guess where that section might be? Senate District 47. So since I got to the General Assembly, I've been working on this issue. I do have, so I've done something on this effort every session. This session, the bill that I filed is utilizing OKRA funding so that a school corporation or a city or a town, if they have a broadband build-out project idea, they can apply for this funding. And for instance, if we said, I'll just use West Washington and Washington County as an example. West Washington School Corporation could say, we want to partner with our local government, and we want to put together a broadband plan to get access to the internet at the school and to the student population. and they apply for grant funding to do that. The county and the school corporation submit the plan, and then Okra decides which awards are given and in what quantity. I would like to see this program become much like Stellar Communities, and we have a couple of major broadband expansion awards every year, and that we get enough funding in there that would be something we could do, and it has to be directed to unserved areas. In broadband conversations, you'll hear words like unserved and underserved. And some federal dollars have come into the state of Indiana for broadband expansion several years ago. It did not designate whether it needed to go to unserved or underserved areas. And so when all that federal funding came in, it went to underserved areas instead of unserved areas, and they ended up overbuilding in underserved areas and not building in unserved areas. So know that we are focused on trying to get access, and one of the things that Senator Messmer and I are aggressively working on that just came up in the last week or so is that the Department of Transportation has now started charging fees to access their right-of-way for broadband. They're calling it the broadband corridor. And for a provider to access the broadband corridor, they're charging fees. So in rural Indiana, that fee is $1,500 per mile per year to access their right-of-way. So Mark and I are going to be trying to, at a minimum, if it's an unserved area, not allow NDOT to charge those fees. I would prefer that, since taxpayers have already paid for that infrastructure, that we don't charge at all. But we work on these issues, and we get to a point where we try to, get the right things accomplished, and certainly we would want to see no fees, but at a minimum, we're going to be fighting for no fees in unserved areas, because the state of Indiana should in no way be standing in the way of broadband expansion for our citizens. So other than that, the newborn safety devices bill, that did pass the Senate. That allows for volunteer fire departments that are staffed 24/7 to have an incubator device where a woman who who wishes to abandon a child can do so safely and anonymously, and that bill did pass out of the Senate. Other than that, I've got several other issues that I'm working on, but know that my approach is listen to the concerns of the folks that I represent. If I am made aware of gaps, and this list of legislation came from people from Southern Indiana in Senate District 47 based on my conversations and identifying gaps. And that's the way I approach it. I'm certainly, it's my pleasure to serve in the General Assembly, and looking forward to, we're about the halfway point at session, and the second half is always a little wilder than the first. So happy to be continuing on, and thank you guys for coming out and listening to us today.
All right. Thank you, Erin, and appreciate hearing what's happening on the House side. A follow-up on her study committee recommendation. There's usually hundreds of bills each session that get study committee requests, and about 25 that get granted. So that's, usually that's a death sentence for your issue if it gets, sentenced to study committee. The second most hazardous place for your bill is Rules Committee. So if your bill goes to Rules, that's trouble. That means it's not usually going anywhere. Appreciate everybody coming out today. I wanted to cover, some of the bills. And you probably all know, my Senate district covers the Jasper and Southridge, southeast areas of Du Bois County. Erin's covers northeast Du Bois and Forest Park areas in general. That's kind of how they split the county. And then I've got all of Pike County, all of Spencer County, and then basically from Linville, Boonville down to Alcoa and everything to the east in Warwick County, from about the Toyota plant in Gibson County north all the way through Vincennes. So that's the kind of the spread of my district. I've got 11 bills that I filed. We have a 10-bill limit, but I got to inherit one from Senator Hirschman. So that was he resigned, I think, on January 2nd, and so I got one of the bills he had worked on. Everybody got distributed his bills, and I picked up one. One of my 11 bills isn't going to move, and I've talked to the chairman of the local government committee, and being a short session, you've only got about 3 committee weeks, maybe 4, to get your bills through. And if you have 20 or 30 bills assigned to your committee, you gotta whittle it down to, what you think is the most important ones to move. I probably got 25 or 30 bills in Commerce Committee, and I've got a couple of my own that I'm not going to move. But there's House bills that are coming that cover the same content, and I'm going to be the Senate sponsor of those bills. So I figured, well, why do them twice? Because second half of session is kind of nutty, and if I'm trying to chase my bill and I'm sponsoring a House bill, and it's too much in a short session for sure. One of the bills and half of my bills were brought to me, that were born out of concerns or interests that happened at here in the local in my district. And then 3 of them were brought to me by different agency groups that wanted some of their codes updated. The Chiropractor Association had brought me legislation, and I think House Bill 1384 that Representative Weimer is carrying in the House. My bill, the Health Committee, had too many bills like inspect and I mean there's opioid bills, and I mean they've got a pretty big hurdle bills. So the House bill is moving. I've worked with Representative Weimer and the chiropractors and the physical therapists and the occupational therapists and the doctors, and trying to get that bill in a shape where either they like it, support it, or at least don't hate it. And I mean that bill's moving, and it'll be on the floor this week, and then I'll be sponsoring it in the second half. House Bill 162 was the one that's not going to get a hearing, but it came to me from an EMT in Spencer County, and she lives probably not more than 20 miles at the most from Evansville, but the way Warwick County, Spencer County, and Vandenberg County, and it's not unusual to have little county bump outs all over the place where you might only live 10 to 15 miles from the county or jurisdiction that has a fire, police or fire or EMT job that you want to apply for. But the current law says you either live in the county or a contiguous county. And I could be in a non-contiguous county or be in a contiguous county from Evansville to northern Gibson County. You might be 50 miles away and you qualify. But I could be 20 miles away and be in a non-contiguous county and not qualify. So it was just adding to that list of who was eligible to apply, somebody in a non-contiguous county that was, 50 miles from the area. But Senator Buck had too many bills to deal with, and he said, bring it back next year, we'll move it. Senate Bill 163 came from a request from Du Bois County Title over the years and local banks. At a real estate closing in 2011, there was a bill that I was given to by Woody Burton that I didn't, at the time, when a legislator, this is a warning, when they ask you to carry a bill, be aware. Anyway, it required all transactions above $10,000 at a real estate closing to be wired, mandated that they be wired. And the title companies kind of liked it. Some of them, my title company here, didn't like it. He said, what if I'm doing a closing and it has, Fifth Third Bank and Old National or Old National and GAB or Springs, why do I have to wire money across town? That's the most expensive way to transfer that money. And it is secure if you indeed know for sure you're wiring it to the place you intended. But what's happened the last couple of years is scammers, watch for posting dates of real estate closings, and they'll send out an email that looks like it's from Springs Valley or German American or Old National or Fifth Third or you name the bank, to the people at the closing, and it's a fraudulent wire address, and it's an overseas bank. And we've had realtors and banks and title companies across the state lose tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars, from fraudulent wiring transaction information getting sent out. And all it does is take it back to what it was before 2011. Wiring, if you feel it's the most secure method for your closing, and you've got a high degree of confidence that but also allows other electronic transfer methods. It allows bank checks, and if two banks can call each other and verify the funds are there, and they feel that's secure, leave it up to them to decide the most secure option. The State Title Association thinks it's the worst thing that ever happened because they're the ones who drafted the bill in 2011. But pride of ownership is causing them grief, I think. But most people in the industry want that mandate gone because the fraud has become horrific. I think there was a realtor in Evansville that lost $50,000 last year alone on fraudulent wire transfer instructions. One that came to me from Pike County Collision, Senate Bill 164, requires insurance companies, or does not allow them to steer customers to preferred vendors. It gives customers the option of where they want their repair done, and it gives body shop owners some protection that if a manufacturer recommends or requires a list of repairs to be done, to have the repair done in a safe manner, to not void any warranty issues, that an insurance company can't arbitrarily not cover items that are that are manufacturer recommendation. If they don't do the repair, the body shop is in a huge liability position. There was a case in Texas where one body shop didn't follow everything under the dealer's recommendations and lost a $42 million liability suit. And there was a body shop chain in Evansville or in Indianapolis a few years ago that felt they did follow all the recommendations, but didn't have it documented well enough. Got in the middle of a lawsuit on not following recommendations and lost and had to close their body shop chain. So if it's a recommended repair, if it's a required repair, the insurance company needs to cover that. So they either don't do it and send out potentially an unsafe vehicle, do it and then charge the owner extra, or do it and don't get paid. Well, you've left that person in the really a no-win situation, and work with the insurance companies, quite a bit on this to get this to a point where they support it. They understand it's a problem, and it's not a problem with all insurance companies. It's kind of you always have to do things because of the worst offenders in whatever issue you're dealing with, and try to craft things that then work for everybody else. One of them is a fix to Senate Bill 213 that we passed last year, Senate Bill 258, and I talked to Senator Houchin, and I think the House has a similar fix to that bill coming. My bill would basically, there was through some crafting of the conference committee reports and the multiple versions of conference committee reports that they worked on, they ended up with from when we got out of session a week earlier than we normally would have, and when the effective date of this bill took place, there was a week of allowing that they didn't intend, but allowed cities to declare their entire city, or 8 counties to declare their entire county as an underground utility only county or city. And there is no underground only city or county in the state, but these resolutions basically voided Senate Bill 213 by allowing them to declare their entire city as underground. Anybody drive around Jasper and see wires hanging on poles? Well, we are one of those underground only cities, if you didn't know. So only one in my district that has that resolution adopted, but we've got to, that's got to be corrected. Representative Ober, I believe, is working on House Bill 1050, I believe is the bill. He's coming at it with a little bit different angle. Mine just takes the May 1st date and moves it back to April 15th, because talking to Senator Houchin, talking to Representative Ober, all the people that worked on the conference committee report, there was never any intention to leave a 1-week window to nullify the bill by local government. So it'll get fixed one way or the other. We'll see. We'll see which one prevails at the end of the session, but one of those two will end up in place. Another one that came from generated locally, Mayor Spinner called me about the middle of April last year. We were getting close to the end of session, and said, we've got our stellar grant program that we've got, and we're working with NDOT and working with Lieutenant Governor's office and trying to get these grants and these funds and stuff spent to get our downtown area beautified under the Stellar Cities program. But the downtown area is what they call a historic preservation area, that 4th Street area, the old buildings, and that area is designated as historic preservation zone. And because they wanted to use only state funds to pay for it to speed other processes up. NDOT can either match federal and state, or they can use only state dollars. And if you're using federal dollars, the process for that historic preservation review is done by the federal government, and they said it's a 30-day process. But when it's only state dollars, the current process, the group that meets to approve those only meets quarterly, as long as they have a quorum. And if they don't have a quorum, it might be 6 months until they meet. And so we could potentially have our project approval, delayed 6 months, which would delay us an entire construction season, and could put the project, another year behind schedule. So I worked with the Department of Natural Resources during the interim, and had them craft language on how they could get their historic preservation review process similar to the federal process and get it down to a 30-day window. And that's Senate Bill 380, and DNR likes it, and it'll, with community crossings program, dollars that are going to be spent over the next few years, there's going to be end up a lot of downtown areas, a lot of historic preservation areas that are going to fall into this same potential, problem with delays in construction. So this 30-day process is really key to keeping those projects moving along. Senate Bill 381 came from Dina Hubler, the CASA director here in the county. We had a 100 Men Who Cook program that we're getting ready for this fall. The CASAs are going to be our fundraising recipient. And after one of our organizational meetings, Dina came up to me and said, if a child is a sexual abuse victim, all of the kids in that family, get considered what they call a CHINS, a Child in Need of Service designation. But if a kid gets physically abused, and it's pretty specific on, broken arm, broken collarbone, something that's, severe physical injury, the rest of the kids in that family are not covered as a child in need of service. But if one kid is abused in a family, there's probably a pretty good reason to watch the rest of them. And so I worked with DCS, I worked with the juvenile court judges and all the people that are involved in that process, during the interim, and Senate Bill 381, which is going to be heard Monday morning, would bring kids that are physical abuse victims in that same oversight designation as a kid that is sexually abused. And didn't have anybody opposed to that process, through the process of getting the bill ready. Dina's coming up Monday for the hearing, so she's pretty excited. I'm glad to have her there. Senate Bill 382 was my short-term rental bill that I worked on. I was the study committee chairman on that issue. The Airbnb, VRBO, those are just electronic platforms for those short-term rental services. But the short-term rental and Carmel was really the community that brewed that issue up to last year. They were working on an ordinance that would have banned it, to anybody. They had sent out cease and desist letters to the people in Carmel that had homes on Airbnb and said, you can't do that, and they tried to craft an ordinance to shut them down. So it came to the General Assembly last year, and we had a bill that we moved through the Senate, but I think it died by a 50 to 48. You have to have 51 votes in the House to pass a bill. It only had 50. So it did get brought back as an interim study committee issue. And my study committee recommendations that we came out with said, if it's your homestead, if it's your personal property that you claim homestead credit on, or at least qualify for homestead credit, that you are allowed to do what you want with your home. If it's your home, if you want to rent out a room, if you want to rent out the home, if it's your homestead, local government, and here again, it's that split. Where do we balance private property concerns versus, local government oversight? And that's kind of the balance you tread on all of these issues. And I didn't say a whole lot to Steve and Shane ahead of time, but I said they both supported the bill. So. But it's a delicate balance, and so the recommendations were, if it's your home, hands off. If it's not your home, if it's an investment property, then local government has the ability to set rules on whether you need a Board of Zoning Appeal waiver, whether you need a permit. And I think then, my bill wasn't real specific on that local government process, but Representative Lehman, who's the the House author of House Bill 1035, did then set some parameters on how to, how to regulate that permit process. Had full support of the AIM, that's this Association of Indiana Municipalities. They supported his bill and my bill because it does balance that difference, well. The people that are in the real estate business, the people that are in the Airbnb business, local government. I mean, that was a bill that everybody supported in the end. Well, last year it struggled because it had, it had really not good balance between local oversight and individual property rights. But that bill passed 74-19, I think, on Monday, and I'll be the Senate sponsor on it. Another bill that I've got that came from the architects and engineers and builders was Senate Bill 383, and it requires and they wanted it to be more encompassing to cover all public works, but to get agreement on everybody and, the architects and engineers and builders that were involved with it. We're going to narrow it to just K through 12 education buildings, that products that are spec'd on that building need to have 3 vendors that can meet the specifications. And on federal projects, that's current law. But on state projects, there was nothing that specified that. But it does allow school boards the ability, if they've got security, I mean, really on anything they want, but typically what we talked about ahead of time was, locks, security systems, alarm systems, things that you want continuity between all your buildings, and you want, one vendor. It does allow, the school board on items that they want a single vendor, to approve that at a school board meeting, and then they're free to do that. But to be transparent in that process. I mean, it's an issue that I think a lot of times happen that, school boards and administrations didn't know was happening. But it does allow when they want to specify for consistency across their board on issues of public safety and issues like that, it allows a way for that to happen. So that took a couple years to get it to that point to where everybody agreed on it, but that was a bill that has, all the affected parties seem to be in pretty much agreement this year. And then the last bill that I had was Senate Bill 424, and I think that issue came from the State Building Commission request. They thought they had oversight to, if they're, and they wanted, and that's a bill that would prevent local ordinances from requiring sprinklers on residential property. And currently there is no ordinance on residential property requiring sprinklers, but that's a very expensive proposition to get added to home building cost and a very expensive process to maintain. If you have apartment complexes, commercial buildings, sprinklers are currently mandated and would stay that way. It would just on residential properties not allow that ban to be adopted locally. It ended up in Representative Fry's got that in House Bill 1030. So I had that bill in my committee, but I chose not to hear it because House Bill 1030 is coming to me and in my committee, and why duplicate the work? So that's about all I've got on my issues. We do have, just some, and I've got the flyer back here too, kind of covers the Senate side of the building, what we saw as our focus bills this year. One of them was Senate Bill 221. We've got some workforce development issues that I think are going to be great tools to getting to get adults and kids, job-related training, making good headway on those. Senate Bill 189 that passed this week that addresses the $25 million shortfall. We had about 6,000 students additional showed up this year in our schools. The superintendents give us their projections each year, what they think they've got coming this year and next year, and that's what we base our school counts on. I mean, having 6,000 additional students show up is a good problem. It means they're probably moving here with families that have taken jobs here, but the shortfall in the funding needed to be addressed. Well, thank goodness we've got some budget surpluses to be able to deal with shortfalls that occur in situations like this. That bill passed out, I believe, unanimously Monday. It'll go to the House, and I'd expect them to move on that pretty quick as well. And one of our bills, the Sunday Sales Bill, Senate Bill 1, and I have surveyed that thing at least 5 times in the last 10 years, and this year was no different. Every year it comes out almost 50-50. I had 1,913 survey respondents. I had 960 opposed, 953 support. Said, come on, can you give me a little more guidance on this issue than that? But it has been a 50-50 issue for the last 10 years. And finally, this year, I think the retail, the retail sales establishments at all levels agreed to move the Sunday sales bill. It'll be from noon to 8 p.m., and that's the limit on the hours of time of sale. I think the House has a version that's exactly like that. I don't know their bill number, but they passed it. We've passed it. When one of the two passes it in the second half, that decades-long fight. And it's not that we don't have Sunday sales. We already do. We have Sunday sales at any restaurant or bar that's open on Sunday. We have Sunday carry-out available at any farm winery, at any microbrewery. And so it's not new turf, but the battle the last decade or so has been between the package stores and the big retailers, and how that's going to impact one or benefit the other. And they just agreed this year to bury the hatchet and move the issue. And with the limited, and the noon to 8 allows the package stores to have one shift. They didn't want to have it longer than that, because then then managing personnel on Sundays gets to be a bigger problem. So it's been a 50-50 issue on my surveys. It's probably like that statewide. I have probably gotten more questions on Sunday sales in my 10 years than any other issue. Why can't I buy beer on Sunday? And I've been to the store on Sunday, I walk by the wine aisle and pick up a bottle. Oh, it's Sunday. I've done it myself. So the other issue that came and died in the Senate was cold beer sales. And that one is really a much more complicated issue on market share and who what's it going to do to a shift in retail sales where that happens. But I'll also say in 10 years, other than maybe this year, I've gotten a few emails because Marathon Oil has spent millions of dollars pushing the issue. In 10 years, I have never got the first question of why can't I buy a cold beer at a convenience store. I have never been asked that. I've gotten a few inquiries this year, but Sunday sales, believe me, I've gotten it hundreds, probably thousands of times. So that issue will move this year.
If I can add just a couple more things to piggyback off of some of the things that Mark talked about. One of the things that he mentioned was his efforts on this underground utilities issue. And Mark and I both serve on the Utilities Committee together, and we heard testimony on this issue, and one of the things that came about in conversation was that if we didn't change anything with the local ordinances on this issue, if there were, and we have had some natural disasters come through, there was a question whether if a pole is destroyed by a car accident or a natural disaster, would then the utility company have to come back and bury everything because of these new ordinances? And so we do have some things to address with that issue, and there is debate over what the local governments can do and where the state comes in. When it comes to the ability to restore power quickly, certainly it's in the state's interest to make sure that we don't have any hindrances to that, and that was something I wanted to note that did come up in that debate in case there were questions about why we were trying to address this issue after last session. And then on Sunday sales, I also have surveyed that twice. Both times it has come out in opposition, although the opposition was slightly less this survey round than it was the last time. But based on my survey results of constituents, I did vote no to Sunday sales based on their feedback to me because a slight majority was opposed. So I did get some questions about why I voted that way, and I understand that as Mark's district is much more closely split than mine, because of surveying the issue a couple of times and hearing that feedback from constituents, that drove my vote on that particular issue. So.
All right. Thank you for all of your input and to let us know what's going on at the state level. And now we'll open it up for questions and answers. Carla, you have one? Okay. I do prefer you speak into the microphone. That way the TV station can cover all of this.
Thank you. I'm Carla Striegel-Winter. I'm the director of the Du Bois County Solid Waste District, and thank you all. I always appreciate hearing everything that's going on. It's a wonderful opportunity. I'm very pleased not to have a question about current legislation this year with the solid waste districts, and I just wanted to publicly and personally thank Senator Mark Messmer for his continued support of our solid waste districts in the state of Indiana, and I know that Senator Houchin has also been in support, and you guys can update the new guys on all of that if it comes up again, so thank you.
All right, thank you. Another question? Jerry?
Jerry Henefeld, County Council, Du Bois County. I want to return to the discussion about the opioid crisis that Senator Houchin, you talked about. You addressed the issue with the physicians. In this county, we are struggling with a couple of other facets of that problem. One has to do with counseling, and we have Southern Hills in Du Bois County, and that's that maybe other people can talk about that after a while. But there's another side of it that has to do with incarceration. And Du Bois County, of course, is facing that issue. We have been told by the state that our jail is inadequate, and we, as a result, have initiated a study to figure out what we can do and what we can't do, what we can afford and what we can't afford. And I guess my question is, and I know this is a long-term issue, do you think the state legislature will include local counseling facilities and incarceration facilities in their general study of the opioid crisis? Now, I understand we can't counsel ourselves out of that problem. On the other hand, we can't build enough beds to solve that problem. So my question is this going to be addressed?
So I've been working on this issue. I've been working on this issue since I got to the General Assembly. In 2014, before I got there, the state legislature did comprehensive criminal code reform. It was House Bill 1006, and in that bill, the state said that level 6 drug felons were prohibited by law from being sent to DOC, forcing an unfunded mandate on our local jails and forcing those jails to be overcrowded with level 6 felons. In that, they also reduced penalties across the board for level 6 drug felons, where we used to be able to keep a person and get them some supports while they were incarcerated for a period of a year to 18 months. Now, those level 6 felons are serving at local jails with no support systems, and they're serving in some areas of the state for less than 30 days. That is not a system that is workable to help rehabilitate people under those circumstances. And not that jail is the right place necessarily for that, but when criminal code reform happened, our local jails started becoming overcrowded. When 1006 passed, the DOC started seeing a dramatic decrease in their space, or an increase in their available space. I think at this point they have 7,000 empty beds. It may be less than that now, but the folks that are going back, that are in DOC now on level 6 felonies, have violated their probation or their requirements of their probation. And so they're sitting in local jails for 30, 60, 90 days. They get back out, they violate, and then they're able to be sent to DOC. But in the meantime, our local jails are having to house multiple inmates, and it's not just Du Bois County, it is statewide. Local jails are having this issue with overcrowding. I filed a bill last session that would allow level 6 felons to be sent to DOC. I have worked on that issue again this session. At a minimum, I think that sheriffs should have that as an option if they're experiencing overcrowding or if they have particular inmates that need a higher level of incarceration. Some of these level 6 felons are pregnant women who have addiction problems, and local jails are unable to keep them. DOC is equipped to manage that, but the law says you can't send them there. So I think that while it had, the intentions were good, in theory and in practice, this has been very bad at the worst possible time in the state's drug problem. So I have been pushing the Department of Correction to retool their entire system so that we have the ability to house level 6 felons, even if it's in a dormitory style. The state of Pennsylvania, other states have their drug felons in dormitory style programs where they get counseling, skills of daily living, therapy, and you actually rehabilitate people under those circumstances. And if they successfully complete programs, then we partner with the workforce and we put those people right into jobs. And so what we're doing now, certainly on our incarceration side, is not working. Full disclosure, I'm married to a prosecutor and I come from a background in child services. So yes, I think we need to have adequate treatment options, but there's a certain percentage of people that will only get help if they hit that rock bottom. And unfortunately with the, we want Narcan to be available to bring people back from overdoses, but our EMTs and law enforcement professionals are going out 2 and 3 times a week on the same people. And what we're doing now is just very bluntly not working. I have been a minority voice on this effort. At a minimum, I'd like to see sheriffs have the ability to send folks to the DOC. They have room, and if we don't have room, we are not helping our citizens by just turning them back out onto the streets. And whether DOC is the right place for people, we know it's an option for some in some cases. And right now, with the local jail overcrowding, space available at DOC, it blows my mind that we're not taking full advantage of resources that system can provide. In addition to that, Governor Holcomb has announced additional counseling facilities and treatment centers, and he is focused on trying to get better access. I had asked for last summer a list of all the different places that males and females and juveniles can go to access treatment, and there are some parts of the state that have to travel 2 hours or more to get to a treatment center, and if you've got to go multiple times a week, these families just can't do that. So I hear you. I hear your concerns. My answer is that I would like to see us in our next budget year really heavily focus on improving this, not only the DOC system, but treatment in general, because we have to get our hands on this problem. And so I would like to see the budget year deal with it aggressively and try to get to a resolution and stop putting the burden on our local counties. So.
All right, thank you.
Hi, my name's Ann Tangeman. I live in Jasper, but we own land in Columbia Township. And I'm asking the senators to support Senate Bill 275. We have 45 acres of woodland, and the value of those trees, because the state forest can be cut to the extent they are, my trees are not as valuable as they should be. Thus, they're not cut. But I'm thinking that if you guys would support this bill, you would also support small woodlot owners like ourselves. Thank you.
All right, another, Jane, I think you had a comment.
I have a comment on SB 275 as well. You talked about historic preservation. By the way, my name is Jane Melchior, and I'm from Jasper. I have been a former timber grower myself, and I know what she's talking about. And I appreciate your willingness to listen to this. You talked about preservation, Senator Messmer, and historic preservation in Huntingburg, but Senate Bill 275, one of the focuses of that is that it is also about historic preservation of our forested lands. So there's a component of that. In Monday's Herald, Morton Marcus wrote a glowing endorsement of Senate Bill 275 for a variety of reasons. He pointed out, he starts by looking at all of the problems that our country is facing, and then he goes on to say land use is a big one. And here in rural Indiana, land use is big, and when we cut down these old trees in our state forests, we are diminishing that resource for many centuries. And so he proposes that, he says, Senate Bill 275 deserves passage to open a new era in land use for Indiana and meet our obligations to future generations. And I would really like to see everyone be on board with this because it affects a lot of landowners, timber growers, and the general public's ability to use those forests as well as the future. So thank you.
I'd like to thank you all again for being here and offering us this opportunity. My question involves the same subject, but this question of surveys. My name is Rock Emmerich. I live out near the Ferdinand State Forest, and here with a lot of my friends and neighbors who have been concerned about the monumental exponential increase in cutting of our public forest to the point where we can't even enjoy a walk in the woods anymore without entering a sea of stumps every so often. And with the current rate projected into the future, the next generation to follow will have very few pristine backcountry forests to walk in. So I could talk more about that, but I love what you've said about surveys. I've attended many meetings and written letters, and it's my belief that the vast majority of Indiana citizens believe that Senate Bill 275 would be a reasonable compromise, which would set aside 30% of the most pristine backwoods, work with the DNR, walk Donaldson Woods sometimes if you've never done that it's up in Spring Mill State Park. It's a pristine, beautiful forest that's managed by the DNR. And if we could come to some sort of an agreement on this as a state, that what's been happening since 2002 is a radical shift. You know, people sometimes call some of us radicals. What the state is doing is radical. If you haven't walked the Ferdinand State Forest trails, we have tourism signs. As you come off the interstate, the various things to look for in the county, and one of them is the Ferdinand State Forest. And as someone who lives out there, I wouldn't recommend it to people to walk through. It's sad what's going on. And I know there are reasons for cutting. So this bill would set aside just 30% of some of the best, most beautiful areas, or go back to where it was before, where there were more select cuts, and like pine forest are some of the most beautiful places to walk through, but we're set on cutting out all the things that our ancestors put out in the 1930s during the CCC movement. So anyway, my question is, would you support a survey, minimally a survey, as you did with the alcohol on Sunday issue, that would get a sense of where the public stands on this, and really have a public discussion about what's going on? I think that would be a step in the right direction.
I have not surveyed that yet, but I would be happy to include it on my survey. The only issue is that as 50 different representatives, we choose our own survey questions. Some of those are not ones that we write ourselves. So we can ask for the folks that do our survey to include that as a potential question for us to pick from in terms of what we want to include on the survey. But 50 different senators survey their own things that they believe their constituents might be interested in. I'm certainly happy to include that on mine.
Yeah, and even if we include it on a survey, it doesn't mean there's going to be a committee chairman that hears a bill. So, I mean, I try to ask questions of issues that I know are going to be before the General Assembly that are going to move, because if it's a bill I've got to vote on, you know, I like to have the, you know, input, you know, from the folks in my district on issues that I'm pretty confident are. And we did hear that bill last year in committee, and last year they were asking for a 10% setback, and this year they came back with a 30% setback, and the chairman didn't want to move the bill last year at 10%, so it wasn't likely she was going to move the bill this year at 30%. And currently DNR has over 50% of their forested land within DNR is not timbered. It's inaccessible to be timber harvested on it already anyway, as is 50% of the 500,000 acres of federal land that's that is off limits for timber. So I mean, 50% is already being untouched. So I mean, DNR's looked at that as an issue, that they've already got over half of their acreage untimbered. But the request is not on. I mean, I get your interest in it, but there is already more of their forested property that is not cut than is. So, and we buy state forest for the state for the process of managing the timber, harvesting the timber, for operating dollars for DNR.
Yeah, just a caveat on to that. My district has, out of the 6 counties in the state that have over 20% owned by state or federal forest land, my district has 3 of those counties. So I definitely want to put that on my survey this next time. So thank you.
My name is Paul Brockman. This is with regard to House Bills 1004 and 1005, specifically advertising budgets for towns and townships. If passed, it appears that this may open the door to less publication of budgetary matters in the legals and local newspapers. In speaking with a reporter for one of the local newspapers, he stated that 60% of the public do not read the online budgets and that the newspaper legals are important for transparency. I believe that to be true. It used to be that the DLGF would have local meetings where folks could make budgetary comments. They no longer have those. And also, as another issue regarding township government, I wonder if there's any sentiment to, say, roll that into the duties of the commissioners, because it does appear there's a large amount of idle money sitting in township budgets and very little accountability.
Yeah, so to your first question on 1004 and 1005, the language, my understanding, I know it's been struck on 1004 because I sit on that committee. So the language removing that requirement to publish has been struck. I know that for sure. My understanding is, because it was a concern I had as well, it's been also been struck from 1005. So to that question, I think that that issue has been taken care of. My concern with it, the authors of those bills, I see where they're going with that, everything moving to the internet. There was no attempt on their part to eliminate transparency. Gateway, the state-run website, has that information on there. And it's much more detailed information than what's typically published in the papers or online. However, I also understand and recognize, particularly in our area, District 63 and some of the other rural districts, internet access is difficult at times. There's generational issues there where some people don't feel as comfortable online either. So I get what you're coming from. It was a concern of mine as well. I believe it's been struck. I know it's been struck from 04. I believe it's been struck from 05. To your second question with the township issue, it kind of gets to maybe a philosophical a difference perhaps. I support 1004 because I can see the need for some consolidation of the smaller townships. Personally, where I stand right now, I would not be in favor necessarily of ridding all townships. I think that the townships provide a valuable safety net. I do believe in government safety nets for people, and maybe as a Republican, that's not maybe a popular, maybe a well-known, I suppose. I would prefer to see it at a local level, where it's you as a township trustee or you as a township trustee, the folks that are genuinely in need of help and assistance. And if we take all that away from the townships and give it to the counties or the states or on up the chain, you lose some of that accountability, you lose that personal touch. So I would, again, this maybe not popular at times, but I would prefer to see it go the other way. I would like to see some accountability, to be sure. I understand that there are some bad actors in the township trustee world. But I think by and large, most of the township trustees are good people trying to do the right thing. Needs to be oversight, needs to be accountability, certainly. But again, I believe that that government safety net would work best when you're among neighbors, as opposed to I know this is an overused term, but a bureaucrat in the state of Indiana, in Indianapolis, or a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. somewhere. So that's my opinion on it. I hope I answered your question.
Well, I'd like a little follow-up on that. having lived through 5 years of Kernan Shepherd battles when I was in the House, Representative Zemke did not. So, I mean, from the pure philosophical standpoint of any township below 1,200 is too small, let's just get rid of them. Well, the number one thing that township government does, I mean, they do poor relief, they do fence, placement, jurisdiction, there's things they do that are their job. The number one thing township government does is provide fire service to the people in that township. And you can't just eliminate, you can't just say, well, we're just going to combine these two townships and that's automatically going to save money. Because I can guarantee the trustees in those small townships don't make much of anything. And you're not going to combine townships and then have, the person who's responsible for now a bigger area do it for probably any less money than the combined of the two of them. The small townships, probably the ones that I know of, probably make $5,000 a year. I mean, they barely make, they don't really, they're not in it for the money. But if you eliminate fire service, the only way you can save money is eliminate something. So do you want your fire station, you want your fire service shut down in your township and now have that 3 to 5 minute response go to 15 to 20 minute response? That means your home is now ashes. And what's gonna be that homeowner's ability to get homeowner's insurance if their response time is 5 minutes or 15 minutes? Their homeowners' rates are going to go up. If you can even get in, if you don't have reliable fire protection, you might have trouble even insuring properties. So there's a lot more to, and if I have 1,200 people in my township this year, I dropped to $11.99, I fall under it. What happens if 2 years later I'm up to 1,300? Do I now get to unmerge? And we went through 5 years of Kernan Shepherd trying to get rid of township government, and nobody could ever really quantify a savings that was going to happen because of that. And my point is that poor relief, when it's my neighbor, I have a whole lot better idea what's happening, with my neighbor. The higher, and the place where government works best, the closest that it is to the people is in exactly that type of poor relief situation. The higher you take that up in a bureaucratic level, the more fraud, the more abuse, the more, the worse it's going to get, monitored, because you take those people away from, knowing what's happening in those families, knowing what's happening, in their neighborhoods. And so you're not going to get more effective, you're going to get less effective. If a higher level of bureaucracy was the epitome of efficiency, then we should all love our federal government. That would be, the higher you take it away from the people that it touches, the worse it does. And I hope that bill doesn't move out of the House, but if it gets to the Senate, I'll do all I can to kill it. I can guarantee you that.
If I can comment too, I sat on local government when this effort for the newspapers there was an effort to publicize everything online and not publicize anything in the newspaper anymore in terms of these budgets, et cetera. And I was fighting that as a person that represents an area of the state that has limited access to the internet. I was doing everything I could to make sure that didn't happen at that time. So I'm a little bit disappointed that they brought it back again. Happy to hear they took it out of that House bill because we fought that successfully 2 years ago. And I fought that in local government, making that very case that you've just made. So thanks for that, continuing to push back on that as well.
All right, we have about 5 minutes, so I think we'll take one more question. Probably more. You had your hand up first, so we'll do his question or comment and then one more.
I just had one quick question. My name's Jeremy Combs. I live out by the Ferdinand State Forest also. And Mark, you just made the comment about the state buying forest for revenue. They had a sale up at Yellowwood, and they had a private bid of $150,000 for this one tract to not be cut. And he was unable to buy it because he was not a licensed logger. So they let that tract go for $109,000. So the state lost $41,000 to have it logged instead of preserving that. So my question is, maybe we could change the law to have private people be able to bid and let the public decide what happens to the forest. Thank you.
All right, I think we'll do one more question here, and then we'll have to bring this to a close.
Good morning. Thanks for coming today. I'm Larry Kleeman, and I have a question about the children in the state, specifically the children in need of services. I've gathered some statistics, and I'll just share Du Bois County, but these apply in all the counties in southern Indiana. But in the last 5 years, from 2012 through 2017, the number of children in need of services, the so-called CHINS children, has increased from 29 to 141 in Du Bois County. 29 to 141 in Du Bois County. That's almost a 500% increase in children in need of services. I've not heard any talk about that, especially in the General Assembly. And I believe we have a crisis in this state, and that the state child welfare system, which was taken over by the state, I'm not sure exactly when that happened, in the early 2000s, I think. The problem is at the state level. It's not at the local level. And I truly believe it's a crisis and something needs to happen. These children are getting removed from their homes and lost in the system. And most of the children are placed outside of the county of their residence because of the severe shortage of foster homes. So I've not heard anything addressed about that this morning, and I would like to know what the General Assembly is going to do about it. Thank you.
Larry, I can tell you that after 2014, when criminal code reform was done, since that time, there's been a 53% increase statewide of kids that need services. And so I don't think it's any coincidence that that's the case, that there's a corollary there, that we have put kids in circumstances where they're having adverse childhood events from experiencing parents that are overdosing or parents that are using drugs in front of them and causing higher instances of neglect and abuse and sexual abuse in some of these cases. I come from a background in child services, so it's certainly something I care about fixing. I do have a legislation this session that would, one of the things that's happening is that when kids go into care, they are often in limbo for extended periods of time where they have willing adoptive parents, foster parents that are willing to adopt them, and the system is keeping them in limbo for 4 years. If a child is out of the home for 15 out of 22 months, they are allowed to file what they call a termination of parental rights. And while we don't want to have those circumstances, there are cases where there are willing adoptive parents who've been fostering these kids who want to have them permanently. And the state in our court system and the processes by which these cases have disposition in court are taking years of time when these children could have permanency in these homes. And so I did file a bill on that issue so that if a child has been abandoned for a 6-month period of time in the first 6 months of life, it would allow the DCS offices to be able to file for termination if there's been no communication and the foster parent is the only parent that this child has ever known. Secondly, if a child is in the home or if a child is in a foster care home, no matter their age, if they've had no contact or communication with a parent, no meaningful participation in their case plan for a 12-month period, then that would allow for a filing. But most importantly, I think in these cases where we have willing families that want to adopt these children and give them permanency, the court system is dragging out these cases for years. And I'm not joking when I say that it's taking 4 years in some cases to get permanency for kids. So I filed a piece of legislation that would allow if a termination is filed and 150 days pass, because the standard is that it should be concluded within 180 days once you make that decision that that's the right thing for that child. That after 150 days, the CASA, the guardian ad litem, or the DCS attorney can file what we would consider comparable to a motion for a speedy hearing, so that within 30 days they need to conclude that case. So we can't just let these kids continue to have this uncertainty in their lives. They've been through enough to have to let them continue to keep going on in that uncertainty. That bill did not get a hearing this session. I did find another home for some of that language and worked to put that in. That will be up for a vote in the Judiciary Committee this week. So I'm hopeful that we'll get something done on that. I can tell you that although it's maybe not been talked about today, there are a lot of CHINS bills dealing with this issue this session. I filed a CHINS bill. You're working on a CHINS bill. We have several of the legislators are working on trying to make it right and get a good system. And it's not unnoticed on our part. My perspective is that we have to get things like criminal code reform right. And we have to get adequate protections in there for these kids and be able to, if we have willing foster parents, get those kids permanency so they're not continuing to just languish in our system. So thank you.
And to add to that real quick,
Go ahead, Steve.
I have to commend the governor. He recognizes there's an issue, and a bipartisan company to come in and oversee that and look at those issues that are there. I think that's one of the smartest things that we could do is get a third set of eyes on this. And the other thing that's interesting is, as a member of the Family, Children, and Human Affairs Committee, to see the testimony on things that are going on and giving a better understanding to the public. I think you'll see a lot of bills come out there. There's several bills that are coming through the House and that committee, and they're working with that system. So we don't want to create something right now that we look at and go, that wasn't the problem. The fix needs to be this. So I think you're seeing a lot of things that are more protective bills of the children, and the administrative system changes of that is going to come after the studies.
All right, thank you for your comments on that. And unfortunately, we have kind of a low note to end this on this morning. But the good thing is you're working on things to help protect the children in our state, and we thank you for that. So again, I want to thank our legislators for being here today. Okay, so our next session will be Saturday, March 3rd, similar format that we have here, and whoever, they're all invited. Sometimes they do have other obligations in other communities because their districts are pretty broad. So again, thank you VUJC for hosting, and thank you to the media and all of you for being here.